we just got to start kind of at the most important college football news of the last few days. That's, of course, the College Football Playoff Committee and their decision for the College Football Playoff. So the top 4 seeds, Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Alabama. And then 5 is Florida State, 6 is Georgia. Ashton, you and I haven't really talked much about this before recording, so we haven't planned out our thoughts, but is it fair to say we both disagreed with the decision by the committee?
This one, I've been upset at committees before, but I felt like they almost always got it right at the end of the season. They almost always got it right, no matter what they did, in the first ranking or the second ranking. By the time conference championships ended, it was usually correct or close to it. And yes, I had all kinds of issues with what happened on Sunday. This is Tuesday night they're recording. I've been sick. We weren't able to record our normal Monday night podcast, so it's Tuesday night when we're recording. But so I've had a little bit of time to sit there and think about it, and I'm still upset. Like, I was upset most of the day Sunday, most of the day Monday, and like even today I'm still like how could you, like, what must Florida State do to get in the games? It felt like what they did was invalid, and it felt rigged. It did. And we can argue as to, if it really was or not. It felt like it was. And yeah, it felt like it was very much a brand bias, a conference bias. I'm an SEC guy, and it felt like it was conference bias. I disagreed with it strongly when I actually started celebrating when I saw Alabama's first, because I thought they were going to put Alabama in the 5 spot, because they went 1, 2, 3, and then they went 6 at Georgia, which is like, I knew we'd be there. And then they showed the next emblem that popped up was Alabama. It was like, they're putting them at 5, and then it was like, no, they're going to 4, and then yeah, it was tough. Anyway, I'm done. What do you think?
No, I agree. I've the closest I've had to an issue with the final ranking from the committee was the first year when TCU dropped from 3 to 6 after crushing, I think it was Iowa State, like 49-3 or something ridiculous.
Right.
But they jumped in Ohio State, who had beat Wisconsin 59-0, and they went on to win the national title. So, it was very defensible. In hindsight, it worked out perfectly. That wasn't that big of a deal. This is just so much worse. Like, this is the one time I think you can definitively say the committee got it wrong. And they didn't get it wrong if you're talking about, like, if you want the most competitive playoff, then sure. Yeah, we all know that Alabama is probably a better team than Florida State, and Alabama Michigan will probably be a better game than what we would have gotten. Although I will say this too, the choice is not Michigan playing Alabama or Florida State. In my mind, the choice was Michigan playing Texas and Washington playing Florida State, which I think that would have given us an excellent playoff.
Yeah.
And man, I just hate it so much. The fact that you go undefeated in a Power 5 conference,
right?
Actually challenge yourself in the non-conference. They played
Correct.
LSU, who they
Correct.
crushed in week 1. And
neutral site, yeah.
And at a neutral site, they were the underdog, and they crushed LSU. And then finishing the season against Florida, who, I mean, that was their whole season, was that game, and they still beat Florida.
At the Swamp.
At the Swamp. It's just terrible. I'm sure they would have been in if Jordan Travis was healthy, like, probably. But
okay,
you cannot say, well, because we saw the third stringer, Brock Glenn, he didn't play very well. That's not even the guy who would have been playing in the playoff. Like,
right.
He wasn't even their backup, who had a concussion from the Florida game.
Right.
We don't even know what Florida State would have looked like with Tate Rodemaker at quarterback. You cannot make the assumption. For all we know, Tate Rodemaker is a very capable backup. You're making assumptions that are just wrong. Like, you just cannot make those assumptions. You have an undefeated Power 5 team. They need to be in. it's not like we're talking about some dominant one-loss team either. Like Alabama did not have a great season by Alabama standards. This is the worst Alabama team, arguably, since 2007. They had narrow escapes against USF, Arkansas, and Auburn 1 week ago. It's not like they lost to Texas and then got their act together and have been wiping the floor with everyone ever since then. No, they've been struggling since then too, including 1 week earlier needing a 4th and 31 to beat a 6-win Auburn team. Make it make sense, Ashton.
It was disingenuous how they tabled the discussion that if Travis doesn't get hurt, right, Florida State's still in there. And they all said this. This is Herb Street. He recorded a video, put it out on Twitter. He's been, just roundly criticized for it. It's, people are not happy with it. But he explained that, if JJ McCarthy was hurt, or if Penix was hurt at Washington, we would view those teams differently. There's no chance they leave Michigan out of the playoff if JJ McCarthy is hurt. No shot. None at all. And to be fair, JJ McCarthy has not put up better numbers than Florida State's combination of quarterbacks the last 3 weeks since Jordan Travis went down. The stats have been the same. JJ McCarthy has not been that good. The quarterback play has been almost identical. So I don't get it. If you want me to try to figure it out for you, I don't think I have a great answer. It felt like the sanctity of college football got ruined a little bit. And does that make me sound naive? Sure. Like, am I just kind of a bit of a romantic about, how things used to be? Probably. Sure. I'll put my hand up and admit that. It felt like a ratings grab. It felt like someone made a call, someone needed something done, and suddenly the committee changed their minds. That's what it felt like. The betting markets would also reflect that. I think ESPN was setting the table for Florida State getting left out, even without the Jordan Travis stuff. There's a great video of game day. This is the morning before Travis got hurt, right? Where they had all the guys out there on set. So that includes Herbie, it includes Reese Davis, right? Like one of the main guys on the selection show. And they both said that, and they had this exact scenario mapped out on a screen, like who would get left out. And they were already pointing to Florida State. Herb Street was pointing to Florida State. This is before Travis got hurt, not after. So they were planning on doing this for a while. It was absolutely intentional. And it felt like there was a narrative being pushed out there, a pro SEC narrative. And again, I'm an SEC guy and argue vehemently for my conference. I'm one of those guys, like the guys chanting SEC in the bowl games. I am that guy. And this was wrong. This was blatantly wrong. The ACC has a winning record against the SEC this year. I don't have a whole lot, for you. FSU played 2 SEC teams and beat them both badly. So. We'll just leave it there. I was very upset. Like it's something that's going to stick with me for a while. I think there was more going on there than what everyone is admitting. And I think it's going to affect public perception of ESPN, of those analysts that have come out and defended this decision, in which there's been many. There's been many big names that have come out and defended this. And they laughed at the people that said that this was wrong. They laughed at the analysts that said that it was wrong, and that was offensive, I think, because to those of us that are college football fans and have been for a really long time and don't have any stake in the game, we don't have any money in the game. We don't care how much someone gets paid. We just want to see the correct teams get in, and Florida State as an undefeated Power 5 champ absolutely should have been in.
Agree 100%. You touched on something there. It felt like it was crafted for ratings. I've never actually felt that before. I mean, we've seen
right.
So there's this debate for years and years and years about best versus most deserving, and they always claim that it's the best. They're trying to put the 4 best teams in, and that's always been disingenuous because we all know it's bullcrap, and they've always put the 4 most deserving teams in, as they should. Like, if you look back at the history of the playoff, it's always been the most deserving teams, and honestly, that's what you should do. If you're going for the 4 best teams, you would just call up Vegas and say, who are your 4 highest rated teams? And that's what you do. And if you want to try to defend the committee by saying, well, they went with the 4 best teams, they absolutely did not. If they were going for the 4 best teams, Georgia would still be the 1 seed.
Right.
Quite frankly, Washington would not be in the playoff.
Probably not.
Power ratings right now would still rank Oregon higher than Washington. And Washington beat Oregon twice on the field and absolutely should be ranked higher than Oregon. Like, that's just simple.
Right.
Like, there's power rankings out there that would have Georgia above Alabama and Alabama above Texas. And that's not the way it played out on the field. Texas beat Alabama, who beat Georgia. Like, and by the way, if they were truly going by best, as they claim, they would not have ranked Georgia behind Florida State. They put Florida State neatly right in between Alabama and Georgia, just blatantly showing that, no, this was all about creating a competitive playoff field, because they want the best possible matchups in the playoff. This was for ratings. This was not for the best 4 teams. This was not for the 4 most deserving teams. And props to them for the previous years in the playoff actually getting the 4 most deserving teams. This year, they went for the best ratings.
Well, and you bring up a good point, too, because like we talk about the argument best or most deserving, and it felt like the committee got neither one this year. Like, we didn't jump all in on the best, which would have included Georgia, because the Georgia point is fascinating, how you have them at 6 and Florida State at 5. So, and they didn't get the most deserving, in which Florida State clearly would have been in there, and you would have went probably Florida State at 3 even. You could argue maybe even as high as 2. So
you could argue 1, honestly.
You could, right? Fair enough. The other point, well, there's so many angles to this, and I was not that guy. There are some absolute tinfoil hat types in this college football world that we live in, that believe that this thing has been fabricated from the beginning, and all of it's just a ploy. It's just a big TV show, just a reality show, really, and it ends up with an invitational tournament. And I always kind of pushed back on that, because if it is, why put Cincinnati in? 2 years ago, and TCU from last year. Were they better than Alabama last year? No, probably not. Alabama was probably a better football team than TCU was. And people use that TCU argument as to that's why you shouldn't put Florida State in. But I want to remind everyone, TCU won a playoff game. They were large underdogs to Michigan. And we would say this year that undefeated TCU team, well, actually, they even had one loss. We would have said that TCU team would not deserve to go in because they could not compete with Michigan. We would use that argument. TCU beat Michigan last year. That's the point of playing these games. We had just, this past weekend, we had Washington, was it a 9.5 point dog at Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, and they won outright, and they were up 20-3 in the first half. They deserved to win. That was not a fluke. They've done that twice now. Like, that's why you play these games. Like, matchups matter, man. Like the emotions, the momentum. Like, there's so many things. The ball isn't round. The ball's oblong. It bounces funny ways. That's the point. Like, we want to see these games happen, and maybe Florida State does go in and get absolutely blitzed, by Texas or whoever we would match them up with. I guess they probably would have matched up with Michigan. Maybe they do get blitzed by Michigan, but they still would have deserved to be in there. They deserve to be in there. It was an injustice, and all of the people that are fake pearl clutching out there saying that, it's extremely unfortunate and unique. I think those were the 2 words that they kept going back to again and again. Like the Jordan Travis injury, it was so unfortunate. They were planning on this before. They used that injury as an excuse to drop Florida State. I don't see any other way around that. I think that's absolutely true.
You might be right. Just what's so frustrating about it is that they've gotten it right every other year. Like, they have gone to the most deserving every other year. And you could argue one or 2 years here or there, like if they got it quite right about who was actually more deserving, but clearly that's what they were going for. Clearly they were going for who's the most deserving every other year until we get to this year. And it would be one thing if Florida State had scheduled 3 horrible non-conference opponents, had not
Right.
challenged themselves in the non-conference. Maybe
Right.
they miss Clemson in the ACC, and like maybe the best ACC team they play is like an 8-win team, and they win all their games by 4 points and just scratch by, and it's very clear they're not a great team. And in the meantime, you have Alabama challenging themselves in the non-conference, losing by whatever to Texas, and crushing everyone in the SEC, beating Georgia by 20 points in the SEC championship game. I guess I could kind of understand that. Like, I guess I could understand that because you could argue they're more deserving.
Yeah.
This is not that. This is a Florida State team that challenged themselves in the non-conference. They beat Clemson, who was supposed to be the other power in the ACC.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, they were a 2.5-point favorite against Louisville in the ACC championship game, and they beat them by 10. Like, they outperformed Vegas's expectations for them in their conference title game. You can argue they would have the second best defense in the playoff, maybe the best. Like, your point about JJ McCarthy's stats not being all that different from Florida State's the last couple of weeks, if you want to compare those two teams, their defense has been about as good as Michigan's the last couple of weeks too. Like, this team, we know they would probably be a 10-point underdog against Michigan, or honestly, they should be the 3 seed, which means they'd be playing Washington, and they would probably be about a 4-point underdog. They would be an underdog, but they wouldn't be out of their element. And we've seen plenty of teams be out of their element in the playoff. We saw Michigan State completely fail to score any points. We saw Cincinnati. We've seen a lot of teams get blown out in the playoff. That's fine. They earned their way there, and it kind of feels like what you were talking about with TCU. Last year, TCU goes to the title game, they lose 65-7, and I'm sure a lot of folks, a lot of TV executives were not super thrilled about that matchup, and it felt like this year they're just trying to avoid that.
Fair enough. And I think to that argument, I just keep pointing back to the semifinal games, which were both fantastic last year. And a game that TCU won. Like, those games do have to matter. And it felt like this is a step towards the games mattering less. The games maybe not even mattering at all in Florida State's case. Florida State was eliminated from playoff contention when they kicked off. They just didn't know it yet. When they kicked off in September, nothing they did was going to get them over the hump. And that is very sad. That is, it's kind of ridiculous when you think that they played Florida State at a neutral site, they played LSU at a neutral site, Florida on the road, Clemson on the road, won all of those games. Like that, that's a great resume. That is. Those are tough teams to beat historically, especially when Florida State's not playing at their place and they have to go on the road or at a neutral site to do that. So I have a lot of respect for the Florida State team. Do I think Florida State is one of the 4 best, quote unquote, best teams? No, I don't. So what? Like that's it's supposed to be earned. And I think bias had a bit to do with it because the best can feel subjective at times. We were certain that Oregon was a better football team than Washington. We were absolutely positive until they played the games, and then we realized they weren't. So, we have to end this conversation at some point. But this is the single most frustrating event that I have ever witnessed in the history of me being a sports fan since I was 5. Like this, it's an injustice what happened. Someone compared it to figure skating. It feels kind of like that. Like someone goes out and performs and the judges just come up with random numbers and throw them out there. And that's what it felt like. There needs to be change. I think there needs to be change at ESPN. The analysts need to bear some responsibility for this because they set that narrative. They set that narrative weeks prior.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of the 12-team playoff that's coming next year, but the bright spot is that they will not be able to screw it up this badly ever again.
All right.